Table for one? The hostess said it like it was a question, like she was already hoping the answer would be no. Miriam Osei stood at the entrance of Harlow's, the kind of restaurant where the lighting is dim enough to feel exclusive and bright enough to see what everyone else is wearing. She was wearing a rain jacket, the pale gray one she'd bought at MEC 3 winters ago because it was warm and it packed small, and she'd stopped caring what strangers thought of her, somewhere around the time she turned 44. Her hair was pulled back, no jewelry except her watch, which was nothing to look at from the outside. She smiled at the hostess. Yes, just me. The hostess, her name tag said Brittany, though she carried herself like someone who'd always wanted to be called something more, looked past Miriam toward the door, as if checking whether someone more appropriate might be arriving behind her. Do you have a reservation? I do. Oh, 7 o'clock. Brittany tapped at her screen, found it. Her expression didn't change, exactly. But something behind her eyes recalibrated. The reservation was there. The reservation was real. And yet, this is a tasting menu evening, Brittany said. Just so you're aware, the full experience is $340 per person, plus tax and gratuity. Miriam looked at her. I know. Of course. The word came out smooth, practiced. The way you'd speak to someone you'd already decided wasn't going to stay long. She was shown to a table near the kitchen pass. Not the worst table in the room, but close. The kind of placement that says, we can technically say we seated you. Harlow's had been open for 11 months. In that time, it had accumulated 2 national write-ups, a feature in Toronto Life, and a wait list that stretched into the following spring. It sat on the ground floor of the Caldwell Tower on King Street West, which was one of 6 mixed-use developments in the city that belonged, through a series of holding companies and numbered corporations, to a woman named Miriam Osei. She had not told anyone at Harlow's this. She had made the reservation under her own name, which was also the name on the lease that the restaurant's parent hospitality group signed every year. She had a reason for being here tonight that had nothing to do with the food, though the food, she'd heard, was very good. She ordered still water and opened the menu. The trouble had started 6 weeks earlier. A woman named Celestine Ibarra had contacted Miriam's office. Celestine was 31 years old, a former line cook who'd worked her way up to sous chef over 7 years, and she had been let go from Harlow's kitchen 12 days before the restaurant's first anniversary, with no severance and a reference letter that described her as satisfactory. She had been, by every account that Miriam's people quietly gathered, exceptional. The reason given for her termination was restructuring. The real reason, which came out in the kind of way real reasons always do, sideways, through a text message forwarded to Miriam by her EA, was that Celestine had raised a complaint with the sous chef coordinator about a pattern of comments in the kitchen. Comments about her food being too bold, about her presence being a vibe shift, about whether customers at Harlow's were ready for her influences on the menu. The executive chef, a man named Gareth Foss, had been at the restaurant since its opening. He was talented. He was difficult. He had, in the past 11 months, lost 3 black kitchen staff. He had never once lost a white one. Miriam had read the file on a Sunday morning with her coffee going cold beside her. Then she'd called her assistant and said, "Get me a reservation at Harlow's. My name, 7 o'clock. Whenever they have space." She was on her second course, a cured salmon with a dill creme that was genuinely beautiful. She had to give them that. When the manager came to her table, his name was Philip Crane. She knew this from the documents. He was the front-of-house manager, 43, had come over from a Yorkville property 18 months ago. He was the kind of man who walked through a room like he was checking inventory. "Good evening," he said in the register of someone performing warmth. "How are we finding everything?" "It's excellent," Miriam said. He smiled. Looked at her jacket, which she'd kept on because the room was cold and she hadn't been offered anywhere to hang it. Looked at the single glass of water on her table. Looked at the empty chair across from her. "Are you in town for work?" he asked. It wasn't a warm question, a way of categorizing. "I live here," she said. "Oh, wonderful. First time with us? First time dining here, yes." He nodded. There was a pause. The kind of pause that has a specific social function. It gives the other person a chance to explain themselves further, to justify their presence more completely. Miriam did not use it. She took another bite of the salmon. "Wonderful," Philip said again. "Enjoy." He walked away. Miriam watched him stop 2 tables over at a couple in blazers and spend 4 minutes crouched at their level, laughing at something the man said, refilling their wine himself. She finished the salmon. She made notes in the way she always made notes. Not on her phone. In a small moleskine that she'd carried for years, she wrote, "Cold room, no coat hook offered, manager table check inconsistent, seating placement." The incident happened at the 4th course. A woman at the table beside Miriam, late 50s, expensive haircut, the particular confidence of someone accustomed to being recognized in rooms like this, reached over without asking and moved Miriam's bread plate, not aggressively, almost absently, the way you'd adjust something on your own table, as if the furniture in Miriam's space was communal. Miriam looked at the plate, then at the woman. "I'm sorry," the woman said, not sounding sorry. "We just needed a little more room. You don't mind?" Miriam minded. She said, "Actually, I'd prefer it back." The woman's companion, a man with a signet ring and the resting expression of someone who'd never been told no, looked at Miriam, then at the plate, then back at Miriam with a particular kind of slow appraisal that had nothing to do with her character and everything to do with her jacket. "It's just a bread plate," he said. "It is," Miriam agreed, "and it belongs on my table." There was a beat. The woman reached over and moved it back with a precision that communicated exactly what she thought of the whole exchange. Miriam looked back at her food, the old heat, the one she'd felt her whole life, the one she'd learned to manage and contain and redirect, moved through her shoulders and settled. She breathed. She wrote in her notebook, adjacent table incident, staff response, none, because that was the point. Their server had been within earshot. Philip Crane had been 15 feet away. No one had said a word. She ordered the cheese course and the dessert, and she ate them both slowly, and by the time she asked for the bill, the dining room had thinned out, and the lights had come up fractionally the way they do at the end of service. The particular magic of the room dimmed to utility. The bill came. She paid it. She left a 22% tip on the full amount, which she did because the server, a young woman named Dara, who'd been professional and attentive throughout, had done nothing wrong. She put on her jacket. She picked up her notebook. At the door, Brittany said, "Have a good night." It was the same voice as the beginning of the evening, no warmer. "You too," Miriam said. She stood outside on King Street for a moment. It was October. The wind off the lake had arrived early this year, and it moved through the corridor between the buildings with purpose. She looked up at the tower above the restaurant. 22 floors of glass and steel, and her signature on the title documents. She took out her phone and called her lawyer. "I need you to pull the operational review clause," she said when he picked up. "The one in the hospitality group lease. The conduct provisions." A pause on the other end. "Tonight. Tomorrow morning is fine," she said. "But I want the Harlow's management dossier on my desk by 9. What happened next took 3 weeks. It was not dramatic from the outside. There were no scenes, no confrontations in the dining room, no press releases, no public statements. Miriam didn't do things that way. She had learned a long time ago that power wielded loudly loses half its effect. What happened was this. The operational review clause in the lease agreement, standard in all her hospitality properties, though few tenants read it closely, gave the property owner the right to request an independent audit of workplace practices when credible complaints had been filed with provincial authorities. Celestine Ibarra had filed a complaint. That made the clause active. The audit was conducted by a firm out of Ottawa that specialized in hospitality sector workplace culture. They spent 8 days at Harlow's. They interviewed 23 current and former staff members. They reviewed scheduling records, termination documentation, and internal communications going back 14 months. Their report was 47 pages. Miriam read all of it on a Thursday evening, sitting at the kitchen table of her house in Rosedale, with a cup of tea and her reading glasses and no one else home. Her husband was in Vancouver. Her daughter was at school in Montreal. It was very quiet. The report confirmed what she already knew, in the way that official confirmation of something you already know still lands differently than you expect. Gareth Foss had created a kitchen culture that was, in the language of the report, systematically exclusionary along racial lines. 3 black employees terminated in 11 months. 2 others who had resigned, both of whom cited the same pattern in their exit documentation. A language in the kitchen that had been normalized, an HR escalation process that had failed at every stage. Miriam set the report down, picked up her tea, looked out at the backyard, which was dark and wet and very ordinary. She thought about Celestine Ibarra, who had spent 7 years building a career and had walked into Harlow's believing she was going to get to cook the food she knew, and had been told, quietly and consistently, that her food was too much, that she was too much. Miriam thought about the bread plate. She thought about Philip Crane spending 4 minutes crouched at the table of people he recognized as belonging, and 90 seconds standing over her table asking if she was in town for work. She picked up her phone and called her lawyer again. The lease for Harlow's came up for renewal in 60 days. Under the operational review clause, a sustained finding of workplace misconduct gave the property owner grounds to restructure the terms of renewal, or to decline renewal entirely and require the space to be vacated. Miriam did not decline renewal. That would have been the easy thing, and it would have punished the wrong people. The servers, the junior kitchen staff, the prep cooks who'd done nothing wrong. She had never believed that burning a thing down was the same as fixing it. What she did instead was sit across a boardroom table from the hospitality group's CEO, a man named Franklin Doyle, who had the particular expression of someone who has just been informed that the building he is standing in belongs to someone he had not expected, and she laid out the term. Gareth Foss would be replaced, not suspended, not reassigned, replaced with a 6-month probationary non-compete that would be enforced. Philip Crane would undergo a formal performance improvement process supervised by an external HR consultant of Miriam's choosing. If he met the benchmarks, he kept his job. If he didn't, the property owner retained the right to request his removal as a lease condition. Harlow's would post the executive sous chef position publicly, with a blind recruitment process and external panel review. Celestine Ibarra would be entitled to apply. She would be evaluated by the same criteria as every other candidate. That was all Miriam would say about that. She wasn't in the business of guaranteeing outcomes, only of guaranteeing fairness. And finally, the restaurant would fund a paid apprenticeship program, 2 positions per year, in partnership with a culinary training organization serving underrepresented communities in the GTA. This was non-negotiable. This went into the lease. Franklin Doyle sat across from her for a moment after she finished speaking. He was trying to find the angle, the leverage, the thing he could push back on. Miriam recognized the look. She'd seen it in boardrooms her whole adult life, on the faces of men trying to locate the version of her they'd prepared for. "You understand," he said carefully, "that we consider Harlow's to be a flagship property, and any changes of this scale could." "Mr. Doyle," Miriam said. She was not unkind, she was not warm, she was the thing she had spent 20 years becoming, which was entirely clear. "I own the building. I have the audit. I have the complaint filing, the documentation, and the lease clause. You can sign the new terms today, or I can let the 60-day clock run and you can find a new location." She paused. "On King Street West." He signed the terms. It took another 4 days of back and forth through lawyers, but the outcome was never in doubt. Celestine Ibarra heard about the changes the way most people hear about things, through someone who knew someone who worked there. She called Miriam's office on a Tuesday and got as far as the EA before stopping herself. "I just wanted to say thank you," she told the EA. "I don't know if she'll hear this, but thank you." Miriam heard it. She was standing in the doorway of her own office when the EA relayed the message. She stood there for a moment. "Call her back," she said. "Ask her if she'd be willing to come in for coffee." Celestine came in that Thursday. She was small and precise in her movements, and she sat in the chair across from Miriam's desk with the posture of someone who had spent years being evaluated. She looked at Miriam, at the rain jacket on the hook by the door, at the simple desk, at the complete absence of the trappings she'd expected, and something shifted in her expression. "You're the one who owns the building," she said. "Yes, you went in there. It wasn't a question." "I wanted to see it for myself," Miriam said. Celestine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "If you hadn't owned the building—" "I know," Miriam said. It was the thing she had been thinking about since the night on King Street, the thing that sat under all of it, uncomfortably, the way real things do. She had the power to do what she did because of what she owned. Celestine had had nothing but her skill and her complaint form, and a system that had failed her at every stage until, by accident, the right person happened to have dinner at the wrong table. That wasn't justice. That was luck dressed up as justice, and Miriam knew the difference. That's why the apprenticeship program matters more than anything else in that agreement, Miriam said. Because that's not about me. That builds something that doesn't require someone like me to show up. Celestine looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, like someone filing something away for later. She applied for the sous chef position when it was posted. The blind review panel ranked her second out of 19 candidates. The candidate ranked first withdrew before the final interview. She started at Harlow's in January. The tasting menu that spring included a black-eyed pea dish with a smoked tomato broth that a Globe and Mail reviewer called, in a paragraph that ran above the fold in the weekend section, the most quietly radical thing I've eaten in this city in years. Miriam read the review on her phone on a Saturday morning. She didn't send it to anyone. She just read it twice, finished her coffee, and went back to work. There's something that stays with you about a bread plate. It's such a small thing. That's exactly what made it what it was. The certainty with which that woman's hand reached across the table, the complete, unexamined assumption that Miriam's space was available for the taking, not out of cruelty, necessarily, out of not seeing, out of a lifetime of small transactions that had taught her, without anyone ever saying it directly, whose comfort in a room is worth protecting. Miriam had sat in a lot of rooms like that. She had sat in them before she had money and after. The rooms change. The bread plates don't. What she knew, what she'd known for a long time, was that the point was never the plate. The point was whether anyone in that room thought it was worth saying something, whether the system around you decides your space is worth defending before it knows your net worth. Most of the time, it doesn't. That's the thing worth sitting with, if you're watching this. Not the ending, where the woman who owns the building gets to restructure the lease. That's a good ending. But it's a lucky one. The question worth asking is, what was Celestine supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? In the room where no one moves, when the complaint goes nowhere, and the reference letter says, satisfactory, and the industry is small, and the people with the power are all connected to each other, and you are standing outside of that with nothing but what you know how to do. Miriam asked herself that question a lot in those 3 weeks. She didn't have a complete answer. She had a lease clause and a law firm and 20 years of building things, and even then it had taken a stranger's bread plate to get her to the right table at the right time. What she could do, what she did, was make it so the next person didn't need that much luck. She didn't think that was enough. But it was true, and she was someone who had always preferred true things to comfortable ones. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something you recognized, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not because the ending was satisfying, though it was, because the middle is still happening. In restaurants, in kitchens, in every room where someone reaches across a table and assumes the space isn't being used. It is. It always was. If you're new here, this is Velvet Honor. We tell stories about dignity, about power, and about what happens when the two finally meet. Subscribe if that's the kind of story you want to keep hearing. And leave a comment. Tell us. Have you ever been in that room? Have you ever been the one who said nothing? The conversation matters. We read everyone.